The difference this time is that several libs, one prominent one in particular, actually tipped her hand and showed what they actually want. Not the no kings. It's even more delicious and more hilarious when it's taking place, the no kings protests, in a country that actually has a freaking king. It's not that they don't want kings, it's they want to be the king. Over the weekend, we saw the third installation of the No Kings protests, in which libs gathered around the country to protest the king that we don't have.
I don't think you know how serious it is.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
And haven't had for the last 250 years. The difference this time is that several libs, one prominent one in particular, actually tipped her hand and showed what they actually want.
I'm not happy that anyone's dead.
Not the no kings. Instead, it's something entirely different and entirely ironic. Now, before we get to that, kind of just for fun, I want to show you this clip. This clip is from the United Kingdom, in which the entire globe also participated in the No Kings protest. Watch this very briefly, and I'll explain why I think this is utterly hilarious. Cut 14.
So happening now in the United Kingdom, in front of the U.S. Embassy in London. The No Kings. There's the new U.S. ambassadors. Protest toads, protest frogs. Anyway, here it is. Impeach Trump. No Kings.
Now, if you thought the irony was delicious and hilarious here in the United States, delicious and more hilarious when it's taking place, the No Kings protests, in a country that actually has a freaking king. Like, the irony is just too much. They are protesting no kings in another country, in a country in where they literally have a king. Just by the way, I looked this up. Technically, it is illegal to call for the overthrow of the King of England, and it is a criminal offense, an act of treason under the Treason Felony Act of 1848, punishable by life in prison or, in some cases, even death. Just saying, I'm just saying, those folks over there in England, the UK, protesting no kings, I don't know, maybe the book will hit them. Who knows? But back to the United States of America, one of the most astonishing things that I think I saw over the weekend during the quote-unquote No Kings protests is the amount of communists just openly around the United States parading through the streets advocating for communism. Here is that clip before we discuss what I think is what they're really actually after on a philosophical level. This is cut 15 from the streets of New York City.
Solution! There is only one solution! Communist revolution! Communist revolution! There is only one solution! There is only one solution! Communist revolution! Yeah! Communism is gonna win, baby!
Now, obviously, it is unbelievable that real people in real life are using their real time, of which there's only a limited amount that you have on this earth, to parade down the streets of New York City shouting that communism is the best. Now, aside from that, the irony is that if we actually had the king that they say we do have, they wouldn't be able to do the thing that they are doing, parading down New York Street saying communism is the best. If we had a king or a dictator, of which they say, yeah, we clearly do, this is why we need to protest, if we actually had that, they wouldn't be allowed to do that. And just, taking a peek around the world, what does it look like in places that do have the king that they are protesting that we don't have, but other places do? One example is Eritrea, a northeastern African country, which you probably haven't heard of because they have banned all media outside of the country. No media coming in, no media going out. Since 2001, the regime has banned all independent media, leaving only state-run outlets under absolute presidential, I use that term because they use that term, but it's really just a tyrant, control, subjecting the entire information space to the dictator's arbitrary whims. Journalists and writers who criticized the government since 2001 have remained disappeared or jailed indefinitely without trial, to which at least a dozen are still unaccounted for 25 years after the deliberate erasure of dissent. Now, in these several examples, we can also find the brilliance of the founders. The founders set up the United States of America knowing full well the inclinations of people who would be dictators or kings, of which we did not want. The Sixth Amendment, if you're unfamiliar, requires that the nature of the crime be told to the criminal, which doesn't happen in Eritrea, obviously, as people have been in jail for the last 25 years. And it gives you a right to a speedy trial. In North Korea, which obviously you are very aware of, the state-owned media controls everything, bans all foreign content entirely, even South Korea. Everything is completely banned in the country of North Korea, which again does have effectively the king that the libs think that we have here, ironically displaying it in a way that a king would not allow. In North Korea, unsanctioned information triggers severe collective punishment, which often extends to the entire families and everybody who knows the political prisoner of whatever crime being committed in North Korea. Now, obviously, the founders thought of this too. The Eighth Amendment bans cruel and unusual punishment, which has been interpreted by the courts to prohibit punishments that are disproportionate, barbaric, or arbitrarily imposed on individuals without personal guilt, i.e. collective punishment. So again, the founders realized, hey, kings do this sort of thing, so we should not allow this to happen. Going on to China, we all know what goes on in China. Critics, citizen journalists, online dissenters often face disappearment, imprisonment, or forced confessions. Violation of what the First Amendment is held. Founders said, hey, kings are likely to do this sort of thing, repress free thought, free ideas, and therefore we need a First Amendment. And probably the most pertinent example of this is Iran. They've got the Supreme Leaders Khamenei, and their theocratic dictatorship, and we obviously all saw the horrible protests, horrible reaction from the Iranian government to the protests a couple weeks ago, which again is against the First Amendment that the founders so brilliantly set up, which they recognized, hey, kings do this, allows you to freely and peaceably assemble in the First Amendment. So bottom line, the framers knew all of this in the nature of man, which is why they devised a country and a system of government that didn't explicitly did not allow for kings to do all the things that kings do, which again is unbelievably ironic and leads to the joke that we all have been making whenever there's a quote-unquote no kings protest, that we don't have a king. But what it also unveiled over this past weekend is the very specific irony that several of the leaders, the spokespeople, the MCs of the No Kings protests actually want and what they actually think. This is the MC of the Minnesota No Kings protest, Liz Winstead, who intentionally or not said what she actually wants from all of the people that gathered at these protests over the weekend. This is cut 16.
I want people to know that if you want to act like Minnesota, or you think Minnesota's a model, what can I do? Well, you can check your ego about what you want to do and listen to the leadership, and when they tell you what they need done, you do that. And you pay enough attention to the amazing organizers who've been on the ground, who actually have the information, who've already done the work, instead of starting your own. Oftentimes when you're like, who's doing it? It's like someone. You just need to learn who, and then you need to be the pack mule in the fight that they have been doing and organizing, because let me tell you what we need is pack mules, because there's brilliant minds and brilliant leaders in this community who oftentimes are putting up the folding chairs when they should be literally strategizing, because that's their strong suit. So be the folding chairs people, be the I'll bring donuts people for the brilliant minds who are actually making this train run.
Unbelievably, what she is doing is separating people into two different classes. One is these are clearly the brilliant people, the strategists, the powerful, the elite among us. The rest of you are just, folding chair plebs. You are the useful idiots. She didn't say it, but she might as well have said it. We need useful idiots in order to reach our goals. Don't worry about the whole ruling thing. We got that. Kind of like a freaking king, right? Like, the irony is unbelievable. Yes, the whole no kings protest. Yes, we're in 250 years of the United States of America not having a king. That's all ironic. But the even more ironic part is the display of what they actually think when it all comes down to it. What they actually think is not no kings. What they actually think is, I want to be the king. To which I say, me too. I've offered this service to the country on multiple occasions. I will serve as your monarch. I will rule justly and benevolently, except for against people that I don't like, which clearly they will, face the full wrath of my rule. But anyways, sorry, what was I saying? They want to be kings. I got too wrapped up in my emotional yearning to be the dominant, powerful, authoritarian force that I forgot what I was saying. Yeah, it's not that they don't want kings, it's they want to be the king, which is really just a lost soul crying for help. Not to take this too philosophical, but it's really interesting when you read about how people perceived the quote-unquote communists and the socialists of the early 20th century. Bertrand Russell is a guy you may not be familiar of, but he was a socialist, a lifelong socialist who really, really cared about the socialist uprising. But even he understood the motives of the types of people who organized, quote-unquote, no kings protests. Now, these people often make the emotional plea of we're trying to help the underprivileged, the lower class. That is our goal, to help these folks. But what I recognize, what you recognize, and what this socialist in the early 20th century recognized is that actually isn't the motivation. In his writing, The Practice and Theory of Bolshevism, Russell wrote that many revolutionaries were, quote, more anxious to injure opponents than benefit the world at large. He argued that because, quote, hatred of enemies is easier and more intense than love of friends, end quote, the movement was then focused on destroying the existing elite rather than constructively lifting up the poor. In other words, the communists, the people that advocate for communism, socialism, participate in quote-unquote no kings protest, say, hey, we're here to uplift the bottom class, uplift the lower class, the downtrodden, the poor. But in reality, what they are really motivated by is, one, taking down the elites, and as evidenced by that crazy lady in Minneapolis, becoming the elites themselves, becoming the kings that they quote-unquote are protesting against. Now, again, at the risk of getting too philosophical about this, there is an antithesis to this. There is an antidote to this whole thing. The idea that lost souls believe there is no such thing as good or evil, only power, which is something that Voldemort said in Harry Potter. I think that can be attributed to J.K. Rowling. Interesting kind of perspective here. There is an antidote to that, and that antidote comes from the Bible, as many answers to life's questions do. I mean, among many verses, Matthew 5, verse 44, which is from the Sermon on the Mount, if you're not familiar, says this, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." In other words, don't exact revenge like the communists do, like the people who would say, hey, we don't want kings, but actually mean I want to be the king. Their entire motivation is not to help the downtrodden, it's to topple the powerful. In other words, a vicious ambition. The Bible says otherwise. Christianity says otherwise. Jesus in many places and in throughout Scripture says, hey, instead of doing that, why don't you go ahead and love your enemies instead? I will be in Anaheim, California, April 16th. Tickets are going fast. Anaheim, California, the Freedom Comedy Night in Anaheim, California, as well as many other dates that'll get announced sooner than later. If you'd like information on any of those show dates, comedy nights, April 16th, April 28th, I'll be with Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh at the University of Idaho. If you'd like any information on any of the live events that are hopefully coming to your neck of the woods sooner than later, TP